The battle lasted exactly 11 minutes, and when it was over, not a single Zelthri ship remained. Commander Zaxrel had tried to fight back, ordering his fleet to unleash their plasma lances and missile barrages against the human ships. But nothing worked. The weapons that had destroyed 100 civilizations simply bounced off the human shields. Like rain falling on a mountain, the humans did not miss a single shot. Their weapons cut through Zelthri armor as if it were made of paper, and their tactics were unlike anything the Empire had ever seen. They moved in perfect coordination, each ship supporting the others, covering weaknesses and exploiting every opening in the Zelthri formation. When Zaxrel realized that defeat was certain, he tried to send a warning back to the Empire, but the humans had already jammed his communications. His last sight was the brilliant white flash of a human missile heading directly for his bridge. And then there was nothing but darkness and silence. Admiral Tanaka stood on her bridge and watched the tactical display. As the last red icons representing enemy ships blinked out of existence, around her, the officers were cheering and embracing each other, celebrating a victory that had seemed impossible just a few hours ago. But the Admiral did not celebrate. She knew that this was only the beginning, and that the real war had not yet started. "Damage report," she ordered, her voice cutting through the celebration. Captain Morrison checked his console and shook his head in amazement. "Admiral, we have no casualties. Not a single ship was damaged, not a single crew member was injured. Their weapons could not penetrate our shields." Tanaka nodded, but her expression remained serious. "Good. But we cannot expect such an easy victory against the full might of the Empire. They will send more ships, and they will learn from this defeat. We must move quickly before they have time to prepare." She turned to her communications officer. "Open a channel to Zelthri Prime. Broadcast on all frequencies, every channel they use, every system they control. I want every being in that empire to hear what I am about to say." The officer nodded and worked his console, and within moments, the Admiral's voice was echoing across 1,000 star systems. "This is Fleet Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the United Terran Defense Force. We have destroyed the fleet you sent to enslave us, and we have done so without losing a single ship. You thought we were primitives, you thought we were weak, you thought we would bow before your power and accept your chains." She paused, letting her words sink in across the vastness of space. "You were wrong. We are not your slaves, and we never will be. But we have not come for conquest or revenge. We have come for liberation. To every species suffering under Zelthri rule, to every people who have been crushed beneath the weight of this empire, we say this: your chains are about to be broken. Rise up, fight back, and know that humanity stands with you." Across the empire, slaves who had never known hope suddenly felt something stirring in their hearts. The message played on every screen and every speaker, and the Zelthri could not stop it no matter how hard they tried. They had never faced an enemy who could hack their communication systems so easily, and they could not silence the voice that was spreading through their territory like wildfire. On Zelthri Prime, High Arbiter Velkanos sat frozen on his throne, his face pale and his hands trembling. He had just received the report of the fleet's destruction, and now he was listening to the human admiral's message along with billions of other beings. "This is impossible," he whispered, his voice cracking with fear and disbelief. "No one defeats the Zelthri. No one." Kolvik stood beside him, equally shaken. "My lord, what should we do? The people are watching. They are listening. If we show weakness now, the slave populations will revolt." As if in answer to his words, reports began flooding in from across the empire. On the mining world of Korath, the slave workers had risen up and seized control of the processing plants. On the agricultural planet of Selvik, the enslaved farmers had turned their tools into weapons and were fighting their overseers in the fields. On a dozen worlds, then 100, then more, species that had been crushed for centuries were suddenly finding their courage. "Crush them!" Velkanos screamed, leaping to his feet. "Send the Grand Fleet. Every ship we have, every weapon, every soldier. I want these humans destroyed, and I want their planet burned to ash. Make an example of them that the galaxy will never forget." The orders went out, and across the empire, warships began to move. This was not a simple invasion fleet, but the full military might of a civilization that had dominated the stars for 12,000 years. Over 10,000 warships, crewed by the most experienced officers in Zelthri space, all converging on a single target. But even as the fleet gathered, the historian Trelawnec was making a desperate attempt to reach the High Arbiter. He had spent the days since the ultimatum studying everything he could find about humanity, and what he had learned terrified him more than anything he had ever encountered. He pushed past guards and officials, ignoring their protests, until he finally stood before the throne where Volcanos was issuing his orders. "My lord," he cried out, "you must listen to me. I have translated their historical records. I have studied their wars, and you do not understand what we are facing." "Silence, historian," Volcanos roared. "I have no time for your fears and warnings. The Grand Fleet will crush these humans and restore order to the Empire." "But my lord, please," Trelawnec begged. "They have a phrase in their history. They call their greatest conflicts world wars, and they have had not one but two of them. They killed over 100 million of their own kind in just 30 years. They developed weapons that can destroy entire cities in a single blast, and they used them on each other. This is not a species that fears war. This is a species that was born for it." The court fell silent, and for a moment, Volcanos stared at the old historian with something that might have been fear. "You are saying that they fight like this among themselves?" he asked quietly. Trelawnec nodded, his voice trembling. "Yes, my lord. And now they have stopped fighting each other, and they have united against us. Every war they ever fought, every tactic they ever developed, every weapon they ever created, they will use against the Empire. We are not facing primitives, my lord. We are facing the most dangerous species the galaxy has ever known." But it was too late for warnings, too late for caution. The Grand Fleet was already on its way, and the fate of the Empire would be decided not by words, but by fire and blood, and the terrible fury of a humanity unleashed. 200 years before the Zelthri ultimatum arrived, a young scientist on Earth had made a discovery that would change the fate of humanity forever. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chen, and she had been working at a radio telescope station in the mountains of Chile when she first detected the alien signals. At first, she thought it was a mistake, a glitch in the equipment or interference from some earthly source. But as she analyzed the data more carefully, she realized the terrible truth. The signals were coming from deep space, and they carried messages between an alien civilization that spoke casually about conquering and enslaving entire species. Dr. Chen brought her discovery to the world's governments in secret, and what they learned from those intercepted communications changed everything. The Zelthri Empire was vast and powerful, spanning thousands of star systems and commanding fleets of warships, beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. They had crushed hundreds of alien species and turned them into slaves, and they were slowly expanding toward Earth. Humanity had perhaps 2 or 3 centuries before the Empire noticed them, and when that day came, they would face the same choice as every other species, slavery or death. The leaders of Earth gathered in secret and made a decision that would remain hidden from the public for generations. They would not wait to be discovered, and they would not surrender when the aliens came. Instead, they would prepare, building weapons and ships in secret, advancing their technology as fast as possible, and training for a war that might determine the survival of their entire species. The United Terran Defense Force was born in those secret meetings, and over the next centuries, it grew into the most powerful military organization that had ever existed. They built their shipyards in hidden places, deep inside hollowed-out asteroids, beneath the frozen surfaces of distant moons, and in the vast empty spaces between planets where no one would think to look. They developed new technologies by studying the alien signals they continued to intercept, learning from the Zelthri without their enemies ever knowing they were being watched. By the time the Zelthri scout ships finally arrived to examine Earth, humanity had built a fleet of 40,000 warships, each one more advanced and more deadly than anything the Empire had ever faced. Fleet Admiral Yuki Tanaka stood on the bridge of the flagship Unconquered Sun and watched the data feeds that showed the alien scouts observing Earth. She was a small woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much, but her mind was sharp and her will was unbreakable. "They think we are primitives," she said to her officers, her voice calm and steady. "They look at our planet and see only a world to conquer, a population to enslave. They have no idea what is waiting for them. Captain James Morrison, her second-in-command, stepped forward with a question on his face. "Admiral, the ultimatum has arrived, and they have given us 30 cycles to respond. What shall we tell them?" Admiral Tanaka smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "We tell them nothing. Let them wonder at our silence. Let them assume we are paralyzed with fear. When their invasion fleet arrives, they will find an empty system, and they will think they have won. And then," Morrison asked, though he already knew the answer, "and then we will appear behind them, between their fleet and their precious empire, and we will teach them what it means to threaten humanity." The plan had been prepared for decades, refined through countless simulations and exercises. Every captain knew their role, every crew member had trained for this moment, and every ship was ready to fight. Humanity's secret weapon was not just their numbers or their technology. Though both were formidable, their true advantage was something the Zelthri could never understand. They had been fighting wars since the first human picked up a rock and threw it at an enemy. The Zelthri had never faced a serious challenge in thousands of years, and their military had grown soft and predictable. But humans had spent their entire history trying to kill each other, developing new weapons and new tactics in an endless cycle of conflict and innovation. War was in their blood, burned into their very souls, and when the time came to fight, they would be ready. The 30 cycles passed, and the Zelthri invasion fleet jumped toward Earth with 500 warships, expecting to find a terrified population ready to surrender. What they found instead was silence. The solar system appeared completely abandoned, as if the humans had simply disappeared. The cities on Earth were dark and empty, the space stations were deserted, and there was no sign of any life anywhere in the system. Commander Zaxrel, the leader of the invasion fleet, stood on his bridge and stared at the empty world in confusion. "Where are they?" he demanded, his voice rising with anger and frustration. "They cannot have simply vanished. Search every corner of this system until you find them." His ships spread out, scanning asteroids and moons and even the smallest debris field. But they found nothing. The humans were gone, and no one could explain where they had gone or how they had disappeared so completely. "Perhaps they fled," one of his officers suggested nervously. "Perhaps they found a way to escape before we arrived." Zaxrel was about to respond when an alarm suddenly blared across his bridge, and his sensor officer cried out in shock. "Commander, we are detecting multiple contacts appearing behind us. Thousands of them." The commander spun around to face his tactical display, and what he saw made his blood freeze in his veins. Behind the Zelthri fleet, between them and the path back to Imperial space, 40,000 human warships were emerging from some kind of dimensional fold that Zelthri science had always claimed was impossible. They appeared in perfect formation, their weapons already charging, their shields already raised, and at the front of that impossible fleet, a single ship broadcast a message on all frequencies, a voice that was calm and cold and absolutely terrifying. "This is Fleet Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the United Terran Defense Force. You came to our world to make us slaves. You came to our home to take our freedom. You gave us a choice between submission and death." The Admiral paused for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was hard as steel. "We choose neither, and now it is you who will learn what it means to face humanity in war." All ships opened fire. The space around the Zelthri fleet erupted in light and fire, and the invasion that was supposed to conquer Earth became a slaughter that would echo through the galaxy for 1,000 years. The Zelthri Galactic Empire had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time, no species had ever challenged their power or questioned their right to dominate the galaxy. High Arbiter Velkanos sat upon his golden throne in the heart of Zelthri Prime, the most beautiful and powerful world in all of known space, and he looked down at the reports his scouts had brought him with a mixture of boredom and amusement. "Tell me again about these creatures," he said to his chief advisor, a tall and thin Zelthri named Kolvix, who had served the Empire for 300 years. Kolvix bowed his head low and spoke in a careful voice. "My lord, they call themselves humans, and they live on a small blue world at the edge of our territory, a planet they have named Earth, and they are quite unremarkable in every way." The High Arbiter laughed, and the sound echoed through the vast chamber where hundreds of slaves from conquered worlds stood in silence, their heads bowed, their spirits broken long ago. Unremarkable, you say? Vulcanos leaned forward on his throne with a cruel smile on his face. Then they will make excellent servants for our empire, just like all the others before them. The Zelthri had conquered over 300 species across the galaxy, and each one had fallen before their mighty fleets and advanced weapons. Some had surrendered without a fight, begging for mercy that never came, and others had tried to resist, only to be crushed beneath the weight of Zelthri power. In the end, all of them became slaves, workers who built the great cities and maintained the vast machines that kept the empire running. What do we know about their capabilities? The High Arbiter asked. Though his tone made it clear he expected the answer to be unimpressive, Kolvix consulted his data tablet and began to read. They are a young species, my lord, having only developed space travel within the last few centuries, and they have not yet ventured beyond their own star system. Their bodies are fragile and weak. Their lives are incredibly short, lasting only about 80 to 100 of their years, and they possess no natural weapons or defenses. They cannot fly. They cannot breathe underwater for long, and they have no telepathic abilities whatsoever. Pathetic. Vulcanos declared with a wave of his hand. Send them the standard ultimatum and give them 30 cycles to respond. They will surrender or they will be destroyed. Just like every other primitive species we have encountered, the integration ultimatum was a simple document that the Zelthri had sent to countless worlds over the millennia. It offered only two choices: submit to the Empire and become slaves, or face complete annihilation. No species had ever chosen the second option when they saw the size and power of the Zelthri fleet, and the High Arbiter had no reason to believe these humans would be any different. A messenger ship was dispatched to Earth carrying the ultimatum, and the entire Zelthri court settled back to wait for the inevitable surrender. Days passed, then weeks, and still no response came from the human world. Perhaps they are too primitive to understand our message, Kolvix suggested during one of his daily reports to the High Arbiter. Or perhaps they are so terrified that they cannot even form a coherent response. Vulcanos nodded in agreement. Yes, that must be it. These creatures are probably running around in panic, trying desperately to figure out how to save themselves from our wrath. Let them stew in their fear for a while longer. It will make their eventual submission all the sweeter. The court laughed at this, and servants hurried to refill the wine glasses of the noble Zelthri, who had gathered to mock the silent humans. But deep in the Imperial archives, far from the laughter and celebration of the court, a lone historian named Trelanik was growing increasingly worried. He had spent his entire life studying the species that the Empire had conquered, cataloging their histories and cultures before they were erased and replaced with Zelthri ways. It was boring work that no one else wanted to do, but Trelanik found it fascinating, and over the centuries, he had noticed patterns that others had missed. Now, as he studied the intercepted data from the human world, those patterns were screaming a warning that he could not ignore. This cannot be right, he whispered to himself as he scrolled through the records, his eyes growing wider with each new piece of information he uncovered. The humans had a history unlike any species the Empire had ever encountered. While other species had known conflict, the humans had turned war into an art form. They had fought each other with a ferocity and creativity that made Trelanik's blood run cold, and they had done so continuously. Throughout their entire recorded history, they had weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single blast. They had fought wars that killed millions upon millions of their own kind. They had developed biological and chemical weapons of terrifying effectiveness, and then they had agreed to ban such weapons, not because they were too horrible to use, but because they made war too easy and not challenging enough. They are insane. Trelanik realized with growing horror they have been practicing for this moment their entire existence. He tried to bring his concerns to the court, but no one would listen to a lowly historian. The High Arbiter and his advisors were too confident in their own power, too certain that the Empire could not be challenged by any force in the galaxy. You worry too much, old one, Kolvix told him dismissively. These humans are nothing special, just another primitive species waiting to be conquered. But Trelnick could not shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The humans were not responding to the ultimatum, but they were also not panicking or begging for mercy. They were simply silent, as if they were waiting for something. And that silence was more terrifying than any threat or plea could have been. As the deadline for the ultimatum drew closer, the Empire prepared its invasion fleet, 500 warships, each one capable of destroying a planet, gathered at the edge of human space and prepared to jump toward Earth. The High Arbiter watched the fleet depart from his throne room, a satisfied smile on his face soon. He declared to his court, "We will have another world of slaves, and the glory of the Zelthri Empire will grow even greater." No one noticed that the historian Trelnick was not celebrating with the others, and no one saw the fear in his eyes as he watched the fleet disappear into the stars. He alone suspected the truth that the Empire was about to learn. The humans had not been silent out of fear, and they had not been paralyzed by terror. They had been preparing. The Helix Nebula stretched across the void like a great cosmic eye, its swirling gases glowing with the light of 1,000 dying stars. And it was here that the fate of the galaxy would be decided. Admiral Tanaka had chosen this location carefully, knowing that the Zelthri would have to pass through this region to reach Earth, and knowing that the nebula's radiation would interfere with their long-range sensors. They would not see what was waiting for them until it was too late. The human fleet had taken up position on the edge of the nebula, 40,000 ships arranged in a formation that looked almost casual, as if they were simply waiting for guests to arrive. But every captain knew their role, every weapon was charged and ready, and every crew member was prepared to fight or die for their species. "Admiral," Captain Morrison reported, "long-range sensors are detecting the Zelthri Grand Fleet. They will arrive in approximately 2 hours." Tanaka nodded and studied the tactical display. "How many ships?" "Over 12,000, Admiral. It appears they have brought everything they have." A murmur ran through the bridge crew, but Tanaka silenced it with a raised hand. 12,000 ships was a formidable force, but she had expected nothing less. The Zelthri were not fools, despite their arrogance, and they would not underestimate humanity a second time. "Signal all ships to hold position," she ordered. "Let them come to us, and prepare to execute Operation Hammer and Anvil on my command." The hours passed slowly, and then the Zelthri Grand Fleet appeared at the edge of the nebula, emerging from faster-than-light travel in a display of lights that would have been beautiful. Under other circumstances, Grand Admiral Selter, the most decorated officer in Zelthri history, stood on the bridge of his flagship and surveyed the enemy fleet with cold calculation. He had studied the reports from the destroyed invasion fleet. He had analyzed the human tactics, and he was confident that he knew how to defeat them. "They are outnumbered," he declared to his officers. "We have superior numbers, and our crews have 1,000 years of experience. They surprised us once with their technology, but surprise only works once. Today, we will crush these primitives and restore the honor of the Empire." His fleet advanced in a massive wedge formation, designed to smash through the human lines and divide their fleet. It was a classic Zelthri tactic that had won countless battles, and Selter saw no reason why it would not work again. But as his ships drew closer to the nebula, his sensor officer suddenly cried out in alarm. "Grand Admiral, I am detecting additional contacts emerging from behind the nebula. Thousands of them." Selter spun around, his eyes wide with shock. "What? How is this possible? Show me." The tactical display flickered and updated, and what the Grand Admiral saw made his heart stop. Hidden behind the nebula's radiation, invisible until this moment, was a second human fleet, even larger than the first. 15,000 additional warships were now moving to flank the Zelthri formation, trapping them between two deadly forces. Admiral Tanaka's voice crackled over an open channel, calm and almost friendly. "Grand Admiral Selter, I presume? Welcome to the Helix Nebula. I believe you came here to destroy us, but I am afraid we have other plans. All ships, defensive formation." Selter screamed, but it was already too late. The human fleets opened fire from both sides, and space itself seemed to tear apart with the fury of their weapons. Missiles streaked through the void in their thousands. Beam weapons carved through Zelthri armor. and the screams of dying crew members filled every communication channel. The Zelthri fought back with everything they had, but it was not enough. Their tactics were predictable, refined through centuries of fighting weaker opponents, and the humans exploited every weakness they could find. When the Zelthri tried to concentrate their fire on one human ship, others would flank them and destroy them from the side. When they tried to break through the human lines, they found themselves flying into carefully prepared kill zones, where dozens of ships waited to tear them apart. Admiral Tanaka moved through the battle like a conductor leading an orchestra, issuing orders that kept her fleet in perfect coordination. She had studied human military history, learning from every great commander who had ever lived, and she applied those lessons now with devastating effect. 3rd Squadron, execute a fighting retreat to draw them toward the nebula's edge. 5th and 7th Squadrons, prepare to envelop their right flank. Heavy cruisers, target their command ships first. Cut off their leadership. One by one, the Zelthri command ships began to fall. Admirals and captains, who had served for centuries, died in fire and vacuum, their experience worth nothing against an enemy who had spent millennia learning how to kill. Grand Admiral Selter watched his fleet being torn apart around him, and for the first time in his long life, he felt true despair. He had never known defeat, never imagined it was possible. And now he was watching his entire civilization crumble before his eyes. Grand Admiral, one of his surviving captains, called out, "We must retreat. If we stay, we will all be destroyed." Selter wanted to refuse, wanted to fight to the death as Zelthri honor demanded. But he knew that if the Grand Fleet was completely destroyed, there would be nothing left to defend the home world. With a bitter curse, he gave the order, "All surviving ships, break off and retreat to Zelthri Prime. We will make our stand there." The remnants of the Grand Fleet began to flee, but barely 2,000 ships remained from the original 12,000. The greatest military force in the galaxy had been shattered in a matter of hours, and the humans had barely lost 100 ships. As the Zelthri retreated, Admiral Tanaka watched them go with no expression on her face. There was no joy in this victory, no satisfaction in the death and destruction she had caused. She was a soldier doing her duty, nothing more and nothing less. "Admiral," Morrison asked quietly, "should we pursue them?" Tanaka shook her head. "No. Let them run back to their emperor and tell him what they have seen. Let them spread fear through the heart of the Empire. When we arrive at Zelthri Prime, I want them to know exactly what is coming for them." She turned to face her crew, her voice rising so that everyone could hear. "All ships, set course for Zelthri Prime. We end this war where it began, at the heart of the Empire that thought it could enslave us. Today, we have won a battle, but tomorrow, we will win a war." The human fleet turned as one and began its journey toward the homeworld of its enemy. And across the galaxy, beings of every species looked up at the stars and dared to hope for the first time in centuries. The sky above Zelthri Prime had never been so dark, and it was not because of night or clouds, but because of the 40,000 human warships that now filled the heavens. Every Zelthri who looked up could see them, countless points of light that blocked out the stars, each one a weapon of terrible power aimed at their world. The population had gathered in the streets and on the rooftops, staring upward in silence, waiting for the end that seemed certain to come. High Arbiter Valkanos stood in his throne room, surrounded by the few advisors who had not fled, and he watched the tactical displays that showed the human fleet in orbit around his world. The Grand Fleet was gone, shattered at the Helix Nebula, and there was nothing left to defend the homeworld. "It is over," he said quietly, his voice empty of all the arrogance that had defined him for centuries. "They have won, and now they will destroy us, just as we have destroyed so many others." The historian Trelanik stood nearby, his old face wet with tears. "Perhaps we deserve it, my lord. Perhaps this is justice for all the suffering we have caused." Valkanos did not answer. He simply waited, expecting at any moment to see the flash of weapons, to feel the ground shake as bombs fell from the sky, to hear the screams of his people as they died in fire and ruin. But no bombardment came. Hours passed, and still the human ships hung in the sky, silent and motionless. The Zelthri waited for death, but death did not come. And slowly a new fear began to grow in their hearts. What were the humans planning? Then a message came through on all channels. The same calm voice that had announced the liberation of the slave species. "This is Admiral Tanaka. I am descending to the surface to speak with your leaders. I am coming alone and unarmed. I expect to be received with the same courtesy." The Zelthari court erupted in confusion. An enemy commander, coming alone to the heart of the empire they had just defeated? It had to be a trick, a deception of some kind. But no one could understand what the humans hoped to gain. "It is a trap," Kolvix insisted. "We should seize her. Use her as a hostage to force the human fleet to withdraw." But Volcanos shook his head. "No. Look at those ships in our sky. If we harm their admiral, they will burn our world to ash. We will receive her as she asks, with courtesy, and we will learn what she wants." An hour later, a small shuttle descended from the human flagship and landed in the great plaza before the Imperial Palace. The Zelthari guards watched nervously as the hatch opened and a single human emerged. Admiral Tanaka was smaller than they expected. A gray-haired female wearing a simple uniform with no armor and no visible weapons. She walked across the plaza with confident steps, showing no fear despite being surrounded by thousands of Zelthari soldiers. The doors of the palace opened, and she entered the throne room where Volcanos waited on his golden seat. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the conqueror and the conquered, the admiral who had destroyed an empire and the arbiter who had lost everything. "You have won," Volcanos said at last. "Our fleet is gone. Our empire is crumbling. Our slave species are rising against us. What more do you want? Have you come to watch us beg for mercy before you destroy us?" Admiral Tanaka smiled, and it was not a cruel smile, but something almost sad. "No, High Arbiter. I have not come to destroy you. I have come to give you a choice." She stepped forward, her voice echoing through the chamber. "Your empire has caused suffering beyond measure. You have enslaved hundreds of species, crushed countless civilizations, and treated the galaxy as your personal property for 12,000 years. By any standard of justice, you deserve to be punished." Volcanos bowed his head, waiting for the sentence. "But we are not you," Tanaka continued. "We did not come here to build a new empire on the ashes of yours. We did not fight this war to become the next masters of the galaxy. We fought to free the species you enslaved, and now that is done." She pulled out a small device and projected a document into the air between them. "These are our terms. The Zelthari Empire is dissolved. All enslaved species are freed immediately. Your military will be reduced to a defense force only, and your weapons of mass destruction will be dismantled." "And what of my people?" Volcanos asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What fate you have planned for us?" Tanaka looked at him steadily. "You will live. Your people will not be harmed. Your world will not be destroyed. But you will work to repair the damage you have caused. Your scientists will help rebuild the worlds you ruined. Your resources will be used to aid the species you impoverished, and your people will learn to see other beings as equals rather than slaves. You are giving us a chance?" Volcanos could not believe what he was hearing. "After everything we have done, after we tried to enslave your entire species, you are offering us mercy?" "Yes," Tanaka said simply, "because that is what separates us from you. We have the power to destroy you, High Arbiter. But power without restraint is just another form of tyranny. We did not fight a war to become tyrants." Tronic stepped forward, tears streaming down his face. "Admiral, may I ask you something? Why show mercy to those who showed none to others?" Tanaka was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was soft but carried through the silent chamber. "Because we have seen what hatred and vengeance can do. We have lived through enough wars, enough cycles of violence and revenge, to know that they lead nowhere good. Your empire fell not because we wanted to destroy you, but because you gave us no other choice. Now we have a choice, and we choose to build something better." She turned back to Volcanos. "Do you accept our terms?" The High Arbiter looked at the document, at the Admiral, at the ships filling his sky, and slowly he nodded. "We accept. We have no right to ask for mercy, but if you offer it, we will not refuse." And so the war ended, not with fire and destruction, but with an outstretched hand and a chance at redemption. In the years that followed, ships from 100 liberated species came to Earth, not as conquerors or subjects, but as friends. The galaxy that had known only the iron rule of the Zelthri now learned a different way. A path where different species could stand together as equals. And across the stars, beings of every kind told stories of the humans who could have become the new masters of the galaxy, but chose instead to be its liberators. They spoke of a species that had been forged in the fires of endless war, but had somehow learned that the greatest victory is not the destruction of an enemy, but the creation of a friend. The humans did not become an empire. They became something far more powerful. They became an example of what could be accomplished when strength was tempered by wisdom and power was guided by compassion. And that, the galaxy agreed, was the most human thing of all.